shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my tomb till I met you. I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. It was my tomb till I met you. Sing this out. You called my name and I ran out of that grave. I left the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave. I left the darkness into your glorious day. All right, sing now your mercy. Now your mercy has saved my soul. Now your freedom. And now your freedom is all that I know. Oh, the old may know Jesus when I met you, yeah. When you called my name and I ran out of that grave. I left the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave. I left the darkness into your glorious day. All right, wherever you're at this morning, put your hands together with us. I needed rescue, my sin was heavy, but chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan, now you call me citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing. Now your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open, 'cause when you call my name, I ran out of that grave. I left the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave. I left the darkness into your glorious day. Yeah. This next song is about how God is bigger than our fears, so let's sing this together. You are able to provide. You are faithful, perfect time. Your goodness overwhelms. I am held through the fire. Through the fire, you're my shield.
I've carried a burden for too long on mine. I wasn't created to bear it alone. I hear your invitation to let it all go. I see it now, I'm laying it down, and I know that I need you. I'll run to the Father, fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, the reason to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I'll run to the Father again and again and again and again. Oh, oh, oh. You saw my condition, had a plan from the start. Your son for redemption, the price for mine. I don't have a contest for that kind of love. I don't understand, I can't comprehend. All I know is I need you. I'll run to the Father, fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, the reason to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I'll run to the Father again and again and again and again. Oh, 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 It's been in your sights long before my first breath, running into your arms is running to life from death. I feel this rush deep in my chest. Your mercy is calling out, just as I am. You pull me in, and I know I need you now. So I run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, the reason to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I run to the Father again and again. I run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, the reason to wait. My heart found a surgeon, my soul found a friend. So I run to the Father again and again and again and again. Oh, oh, oh,
This is typically the point in our gathering where we take communion and we also take offering. And these are things that we want to continue doing even though we're not physically meeting together. Because these just aren't things that we do. These are really core to like who we are. communion is something that Jesus asked us to celebrate, to remember what he's done for us, but also who we are as his children and who we are as a community. And so what we're going to do to make sure that we're still practicing communion is we want you to be able to do that whenever you're ready in your time. And so, when we celebrate communion here, we use just a cup of juice and a little piece of bread. And really, that's kind of what Jesus gave us. He said, hey, I want you to use these two things as symbols. And so what we've done is we have prepared online just a short little kind of communion thought to guide you through communion. And you can find that if you go to fccHB.com/communion, or you can just go to fccHB.com and kind of navigate your way there, or if you go through our app. And so at some point, whenever you're ready, if you want to find something, again, if you have juice and bread, that's great. Otherwise, grab something else, a little something to drink, a little something to eat. And you can either do it by yourself, you can do it with your family, you can do it with your friends. You can kind of sit down, have that ready, log on there, watch that, and that will guide you through communion. We're going to have one of those for each of the next several weeks. So please continue to do that, because that's an important part of who we are as people, but also who we are as a church. And the other thing is offering. Offering is where we practice our generosity. Generosity is at the heart of who Jesus is, that he ultimately gives his everything for us. And so he's asked us in turn to be generous. And so what I want to ask as we go through this crazy, chaotic season, I want to ask if there's any way if you could continue to be generous and to keep giving. And I understand that what we're going through, what our world's going through, puts a lot of pressure on a lot of different people in a lot of different ways, and I understand that. And so just what I would ask is, as much as you can, if you could please continue to give, because we're still working to continue the ministry of First Christian Church, to keep it going during this season. There's also organizations and field workers that we support here locally and around the world, and we're also gearing up for when we get back together, when we start to physically get back together as we kind of head into Easter. So there's still a lot going on. There's still a lot that we're doing, still a lot that we're trying to figure out. So if there's any way you can do that, the easiest way to do it is to give online. And you can do that through our app, or you can do it through fccHB.com/give. And you can even schedule a reoccurring gift, and you can schedule that gift to come from a credit card, or you can do it straight from your checking account. Some people like to write checks. You can actually have it transferred straight from a checking account there, and it literally takes like 30 seconds to set that up. And so again, my encouragement is if there's any way to continue your generosity, or even to begin to start your journey of generosity during this season, please help us to continue the thriving ministry of First Christian Church during all of this. And I know that this is it's a crazy, chaotic season. It is. I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime, and I know for most of us, we probably haven't either. And when you look around our world, the typical response that you see from people is fear and panic. And you see it everywhere. You see it when you turn on the news. You see it when you go on the internet. You see it even when you go to the store, the fear and panic in people. One of the things that Jesus tells his followers over and over and over again, and he tells them this in all different kinds of situations, is he says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And the reason Jesus tells his followers not to be afraid is he's not dismissive of their circumstances. He's not just saying, oh, you don't need to worry about this. It's not a big deal. That's not what he's saying. A lot of times, in fact, Jesus acknowledges that, hey, what you're going through is difficult, or even what you're going to go through is difficult. The reason Jesus tells us not to be afraid is not to dismiss what's happening in our life or what's happening in the world around us. The reason Jesus tells his followers, you don't need to be afraid, is because I'm with you. That's what he says, I'm with you. And even when Jesus physically leaves the earth, he tells his followers, he says, listen, even though I'm physically gone, I'm still with you. That my presence, the word he uses is spirit, my spirit is going to come live within you. And so you will never be alone, and you never need to be afraid, no matter what's going on around you. Jesus referred to the church as the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Jesus has given us the task of bringing hope in the midst of chaos. And one of the things that's so fascinating to me is the more you study like human history, not just church history, but human history, there's all kinds of crisis. And there's all kinds of wars and famines and disease and all these different things that have impacted human history. But what's so incredibly encouraging to me is what you consistently find over and over again is in the midst of these chaotic situations, you find faithful followers of Jesus who refused to give in to fear and instead chose to live in the courage and the boldness of knowing that God was with them. And they were able to bring hope in the midst of that tragedy, of that crisis, of that situation. Our world needs hope now more than ever. And Jesus has called us. He's told us as his church that we are the ones to bring that hope and to bring that life. And so, I understand that we have to be careful. I understand that we have to be cautious. I'm not asking us to be stupid. But what I do want us to really think about is how in the midst of all of this are we serving as light to our friends, to our family, to our community, to our world? How are we being the salt of the earth and light of the world? Knowing that we can do that because it's rooted in the promise that God is with us. We're going to sing one more song, and it's a great song. If you've been around here, you've probably heard it before. It's a really awesome song that talks about God's love for us, talks about our community together as a church, as a family. And I hope this is an encouraging song for you. I do. I hope as you listen to the words, it's really encouraging to you during this time. But more than that, I hope it inspires you. I hope it challenges you. I hope it emboldens you to really begin to ask, what does it look like for you? What does it look like for me? What does it look like for us to be the salt of the earth and light of the world? To bring hope in the midst of all of this chaos.
Come together, strangers, neighbors, and blood is one, and children of generations, of every nation, of kingdom come. So don't let your heart be troubled. Hold your head up high, don't fear no evil. Fix your eyes on this one truth. God is madly in love with you. So take courage, hold on, be strong. Remember where our help comes from. Oh. is in his blood. And Jesus died of heaven, and forever his kingdom come. Lord, we are just so thankful that you are our hope in the midst of this chaos, God, and that you're with us day by day. Lord, we love you and we praise you today. And in your name, amen.
This week, we're continuing our series called Voices. And all of us have these voices that we hear in our head. It's kind of that inner dialogue. And a lot of it, in fact, I would argue most of it, is based on fears and insecurities. It's all these things that come to our mind of all the reasons why we're going to fail or why it's not going to succeed or why we're not good enough. And so what we're doing in this series over these few weeks is we're trying to talk about all these voices in our head and how do we overcome them. Because I really believe these voices, all these fears and doubts and insecurities, that those keep us from living the life that God created us to live. So we're talking about how do we not just face them, but how do we overcome them so that we can embrace the life that God has for us. And this week, we're going to talk about doubt. And what's interesting is when you talk about doubt, particularly in a faith context, doubt is almost seen as like a bad word. That it's a lot of times looked at as like a weakness. A lot of times within, and this isn't just true of Christianity, this is true, I think, in any faith tradition. In any faith tradition, when someone starts to express doubts, typically people respond very defensively. They try to get and explain to you why, well, doubt is bad and doubt is wrong, and you just need to believe this and you just need to embrace it. We oftentimes, within a faith context, we see doubt as an enemy. Now, I grew up going to church. I've been going to church my whole life. I've talked about this often, but ever since I was a baby, I grew up in the nursery and all through children's ministry and youth ministry. I was always a part of church. And as I grew up, I never had any major season of doubt in my life, all the way through junior high and even into high school. There was questions I had from time to time. Questions about, well, what about this? Or well, what about that? And so I would reach out to, pastors or people that I trusted. But I never went through a season where I had epic doubt really until I had graduated college. I was working as a pastor at a church, and I had gone back to graduate school. So at this point, I'm in my 20s. I have my bachelor's degree in ministry and theology. I'm going to pursue my master's degree in ministry and theology. I am a pastor at a church. I'm a youth pastor. And now I start to have all of these doubts. And they weren't just little questions about, well, what about this? What about that? What about this? I mean doubts on the big pillars of Christianity. I was beginning to doubt, is the Bible really the best that God can do? I mean, if God really is God, the creator of heavens and the earth, I mean, when you look at the Bible, sometimes the Bible's difficult. Sometimes, you hear all these arguments for people kind of punching holes in it. And I really began to struggle with, is this really the best God can do? Is this something God has given us? Should I even really base my life on this? So I began to really doubt and struggle with what I believed about the Bible and what the Bible really was, and even if the Bible was trustworthy. And that in turn started leading to all kinds of other doubts. Well, if we can't trust the Bible, then how do we know about God and who God really is? And if the Bible isn't true, then the Bible's picture of God may not be true. And even that, okay, so what about Jesus? You know, everyone kind of universally accepts the fact that Jesus was an actual historical figure, but whether or not he did what he claimed he did, whether or not he died and rose again, like if you can't trust the Bible. And so I was really, really wrestling with what were, again, what I would say are the pillars, the kind of the foundational things of Christianity. And at that point, I really didn't know who to go to. Because again, I had a bachelor's degree in ministry and theology. I was a pastor at a church. I was supposed to be the one that had all the answers. And I never wanted to take my faith and doubt journey and put that onto someone else. So I really kind of tried to keep it inside, but finally I got to the point where it's you know what, this isn't healthy. I have to open up. I have to talk to people. So I began opening up to people that I trusted. And I began to say, hey, here's my struggle. Here's my doubts. And what I found is that people were nice about it. Like they were. Everyone I opened up to is people that I respect and trust and loved. But on a whole, my doubts made people really uncomfortable. And what was communicated to me, and again, I don't think anyone necessarily did this intentionally, but what was communicated to me is that somehow these doubts were bad. That these doubts represented a weakness in me, and what people really wanted to do is they wanted to fix it. They wanted to solve it. So they would give me these short, pat answers of, well, no, here's why you should believe. Here's why you should believe. I'm going to quote you a Bible verse, and you should just pray, and you should just believe. And so through that whole process, ultimately what got communicated to me is, that, again, that the doubt is kind of like this enemy of faith, and it's bad, and it's a weakness, and we just need to fix it. That's why I said people often get defensive. Like if someone grows up, for example, if you've grown up within a religious tradition like Christianity and you start to express doubts, a lot of times your parents or your family or the mentors, the people around you, they begin to get really defensive because they just want to fix it. They want to solve it. And what I found through my journey is that it's not something that other people can fix. And ultimately what I learned is that really doubt is not the enemy of faith. That all this happened in my life, like 15, now almost 20 years ago. And I was able to work through that. And I was actually able to come out of that with a stronger, richer, more fuller faith than I ever had going into it. And so what I've learned in my own journey is that the doubt is not the enemy of faith. Really, in fact, when you talk about the enemy of faith, I think there are two enemies of faith. And here they are. The two enemies of faith, when you talk about it, are fear and control. Because faith is a relational term, and faith has to do with trust. And so on one hand, fear is the enemy of trust. Because if I don't trust you, it's because I'm afraid. I'm afraid you're going to let me down. I'm afraid you're going to fail me. And so in one regard, fear is a big enemy of faith. The other is control. Because in trust, if I trust you, I'm going to release to you. But if I don't trust you, I'm going to hold on to it. And so when you talk about the enemies of faith, fear and control are the enemies of faith. Doubt is not an enemy of faith. Doubt, I think, is a part of all of our journeys. And I really believe if we approach doubt in the right way, it will actually lead to a fuller, richer, deeper faith. And so what I want to do today is I want to give us a framework. I want to give us a framework for how we understand and approach doubt, both in our own life and journey and also in other people's. How do we help other people process through it? Because there's always going to be doubts. You've had doubts before in your life. A lot of us are struggling with doubts right now, and we'll continue to have doubts in the future. And so understanding how do we approach that, how do we deal with that, how do we process through that in a way that ultimately leads to a deeper, richer, fuller faith. So what I want to talk about today is I want to talk about how does Jesus view doubt? How does he approach doubt? How does he respond to doubt? And really, when you talk about doubt, there's two kinds of doubt we're going to talk about today. And I think we experience both of these. The two kinds of doubt we're going to talk about are self-doubt and disbelief. Self-doubt is rooted in ourselves. Like, I don't think I can do this. I think I'm going to fail. I don't think I'm good enough. And disbelief is about other things. Like, I don't think this actually happened. I don't believe this happened. And again, all of us experience both of these. And we're going to look at two stories from Jesus' life. And in each one of these stories, he faces one of these kinds of doubt. The first one, we're going to talk about self-doubt. And the second one, we're going to talk about disbelief. And I want to see how Jesus responds to these. Because I think how Jesus responds to them helps us again, develop a framework for how we respond to them in our own life and also other people's lives. The first one we're going to look at, the first doubt we're going to look at is self-doubt. And we're going to look at a story that comes out of Matthew chapter 14. Matthew is one of 4 accounts of the life of Jesus that we have in the New Testament. We call them Gospels. And in Matthew 14, where we pick up this story, Jesus has just got done performing this epic miracle. He's fed literally thousands of people with what is essentially a small sack lunch. And it's this amazing miracle. Everyone saw it. After he's done with that, he takes his closest followers, this group called the Apostles or the 12, and he puts them in a boat and sends them across the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee, really in a lot of ways, is more like a lake than we traditionally think of as a sea. And in fact, in the story, they'll refer to it as a lake, but that's where they're at. Jesus sends them across the Sea of Galilee, says, go, I'll meet you guys later. Jesus goes off and prays by himself. The apostles are out on the Sea of Galilee. They're rowing their boat, not a big boat, it's kind of a smaller boat. They're rowing their boat. The wind starts to come up. The waves start to get big. It starts to get harder and harder to row. And Jesus decides he's going to come out to them. It's time to rejoin them. But he doesn't do it in like a real traditional way. Here's what Jesus does. Matthew 14:25. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. So Jesus decides to rendezvous with them, and rather than swim out to them, because that would be difficult, he just literally, because he's God, that's who he is, he's God in the flesh, he just walks on the water, because Jesus can do that. He comes walking out on the water. His apostles see him while he's still a long way off, and their response, and I totally get their response, is they freak out. Matthew says, here's the response we had. And Matthew, keep in mind, he's one of the apostles. He's there. So Matthew says, here's what happened. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. So the apostles are petrified. Because they're out there, it's just before dawn, so it's not super light out, it's dark. Something is walking across the lake, they're freaked out, and they think it's a ghost. Now, sometimes it's really easy to get critical of the apostles, because you look at them and go, man, you just saw Jesus perform this epic miracle. You literally just saw him feed thousands of people with one small sack lunch. Why is this shocking to you? Why is this frightening you? But here's what I want us to remember. Seeing one amazing thing doesn't necessarily prepare you for seeing another amazing thing. So just because you saw, again, one spectacular thing, that doesn't mean you turn around and you're expecting another spectacular thing, especially when those things are incredibly different. Just because Jesus fed thousands of people doesn't mean he can walk on water. So no one is expecting Jesus to do anything like this at this point. And so that's why when they see him, their response is fear. And Jesus, realizing they're afraid, immediately tries to calm them down. And here's what he says. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Jesus does not want them to be afraid. Jesus never wants us to live in fear. Because he understands that really fear, when we let fear control us, when we let fear drive us, it messes up everything inside of us. It does. Like we were not designed and created to live in a state of fear. This is why when we have constant fear and constant worry and constant anxiety, it does stuff to us. It messes us up mentally. It messes us up emotionally. It messes us up physically. Like our bodies, our hearts do not respond well to fear. We were not created to live in a constant state of fear. And when we do, it messes up relationships. It messes up how we think. It messes up how our body functions. That's why Jesus never wants anyone for any reason to live in fear. And again, Jesus' reason for not living in fear is because it's me. I'm with you. You don't have to be afraid, Jesus says, because I am here. It is amazing how the presence of some people will calm you in the midst of fears. Jesus tells his apostles, you don't need to be afraid. And the reason you don't need to be afraid is because I'm here. Doesn't matter what the circumstances are. Doesn't matter I'm with you. And as long as I'm with you, you don't need to be afraid. And then this is where it starts to get super crazy. This is where the story begins to get really weird, because one of the apostles in the boat begins to speak to Jesus. His name is Peter, and here's what Peter says. Lord, which means master, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. So Peter's one of the 12, and in a lot of ways probably the most outspoken of the 12. So Peter says, okay, Jesus, master, if it's really you, tell me to walk out on the water toward you. Now, this is an incredibly bold thing for Peter to ask. There's no other point during Jesus' life, or even during the rest of the New Testament, when any followers of Jesus ever felt like they could walk on water. It's not like it's a normal expectation, like, oh, well, when you follow Jesus, you get to walk on water. It's just one of the perks or benefits. There's a guy by the name of Paul. Paul writes a big chunk of the New Testament. And there's a story in the book of Acts where Paul's on a boat that gets shipwrecked. And there's no point like in that story where you see Paul saying, no, everybody, it's okay. I can walk on water because I'm a follower of Jesus. It's not something that people thought they could do. And there's 11 of the guys in the boat. None of them think they can do it. But Peter, because he says, okay, well, if Jesus can do it, then I think I can do it. So Peter says, okay, if it's really you, tell me to come out onto the water and I'll come walking toward you. And here's how Jesus responds. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. So Peter he actually steps out of the boat, which I think this is an incredible scene. Because you have the other 11 apostles that are probably still scared to death. And they're looking at Peter, probably in admiration, and going, dude, that guy is bold. Because Peter actually gets up the courage to step out of this boat and step on top of water and starts walking on top of water. Meanwhile, the other 11 are back in the boat, and they're probably scared to death. And Peter's walking. He's doing it. He's walking on water. But then Peter begins to sense the wind and sees the wind, and he sees the waves. And all of a sudden, he begins to doubt. I don't think I can actually do this. I don't think I can do what it is I'm currently doing. And in his doubt, he sinks and he cries out to God, save me. Cries out to Jesus, save me. You ever found yourself in a situation where all of a sudden self-doubt just came on you? And you just, all of a sudden your mind was just flooded of all of these reasons why you cannot do this thing, why it will not work out, why it will fail, why you're not good enough. When I was going to graduate school, I took a class called Religions of the World. And it was a fascinating class. It was a cool class. We got to study all these different faith traditions. And as a part of that, you had to do a big project on a specific faith tradition. And I did mine on Islam. And so this was kind of like in the early 2000s. And at that time, there was a lot of questions in our country and our culture about Islam and what it was about and what people believed. And so I was incredibly interested in it. So I spent some time studying it. I did some research. I went and visited mosques. I sat down and interviewed people who were a part of the Islamic tradition. And it was a great experience. And I learned a lot. I did a paper presentation. And I was by no means a scholar on it, but I felt pretty confident about my understanding. After I had done that, about a summer or so after I had done that, we were going to a youth conference. And again, I was a youth pastor at the time. And I was asked if I would teach a breakout session on understanding Islam. And I felt pretty confident in my ability to do that. Because I thought, you know what? I've studied this. I've interviewed people. I've participated in these gatherings. Again, I'm not the world's foremost expert. But I think I can help clear up a lot of maybe misconceptions and kind of help people better understand, the Islamic faith, the Islamic tradition. And so I was really excited about it. So I kind of put everything together, got all my notes and everything back together, and put this class that I really felt like, hey, this is a good class for the pastors and leaders that are going to come to this. This will be informative. This will be helpful. And when we went to this conference, I noticed on the day that I was teaching my breakout session, they gave me the largest room because they expected most people to go to that because, again, it was kind of like a hot topic thing that people wanted to talk about. And so when it came time for me to teach my breakout, I went to this room, and it was packed full of people. I mean, just absolutely packed. And on one hand, that made me nervous, but on the other hand, I was kind of excited. I'm like, hey, people want to hear this. They want to know this. I feel really good about it. And so I got up to start my breakout session, and I started just by asking people simply the question, what is it that you know or what is it that you have heard about Islam? And people started just kind of around the room just kind of throwing things out there. And I've heard this and I've heard this. And some of it was good. And, some of it was just, rumors or gossip. But then I remember all the way in the back, like the very center, but all the way in the back, this guy stood up. And he's probably about 40, 45 years old. And he says, like real briefly, he shares a little bit of his story. He says, I grew up in an Islamic country. And I've practiced Islam most of my life. I've only recently converted to Christianity. And I remember when he said that, instantly, all of a sudden, I just felt dumb and stupid. And I literally started looking around the room, trying to figure out how can I get out of here? How can I run away? Because I shouldn't be here. Like, this guy knows way more about this than I ever will. He's the expert. Here I am. I'm a fraud. I'm a fake. I'm a phony. And all these, insecurities started just flooding into my mind, and all these things of, you shouldn't be up here. You shouldn't be talking. You're not. You should just walk away and let this guy do it. And all of a sudden, all this, self-doubt just came over me. And I just wanted to get out of there. I just wanted to run away because I felt like a fake. I felt like a fraud. My mind was just plagued with all these reasons why you cannot do this, why this is going to fail. And I think you and I experience that all the time. All the time we find ourselves in situations, maybe it's even just with one other person in the midst of a conversation, and we begin to think why we shouldn't be here, why this is never going to work, why it's going to fail. We may find ourselves in our professional life just overcome with situations and circumstances and just plagued with all this self-doubt of why we can't do this, why we can't get through, why this is not going to work out, why this is not going to fail, maybe even within our families. Like we begin to doubt like our ability as parents or our relationships or our marriage or whatever it is. Our minds begin to be filled with all this self-doubt of why we cannot do it, why it's not going to work, why we're going to fail. This is what happens to Peter when he walks on the water. Peter starts off with this courageous, bold belief that, okay, Jesus, if you tell me I can do this, then I can do it. But then when he gets out there and he looks around, he begins to think to himself, well, I actually can't do it. And he sinks. All his belief in himself is just completely zapped away. It's gone, and he sinks. And as he sinks, he cries out to Jesus, save me. And now I want you to listen to how Jesus responds. Here's how Jesus responds to it. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? Immediately. Jesus doesn't hesitate. He doesn't abandon. He doesn't leave him there and be like, you loser, and get back in the boat and leave him. Immediately, Jesus picks him up. And he doesn't lecture him. He doesn't scream at him. He doesn't yell at him. He's not like disappointed in him. He just looks at him and says, Peter, why didn't you trust? I told you you could do it. Why did you doubt that? See, here's one of the things I love about this particular story. This story, yeah, it's about Peter's trust and his faith and his belief in Jesus. But even more than that, it's about Jesus' belief in Peter. That the whole story starts because Peter looks at Jesus and says, Lord, Master, if it's you, tell me that I can do it. And Jesus says, okay, you can do it. And then, Peter steps out on the water and he sinks. And Jesus' response to him here is really rooted in, it's not anger, it's not disappointment, but Jesus is literally saying, Peter, I told you you could do it. Why did you doubt? Why did you doubt who I said that you were? See, Peter's doubt isn't so much in Jesus as it is in himself. That Peter sunk because Peter began to doubt that he could actually do what it is that Jesus told him he could do. And so when Jesus says, why did you doubt? This is what he's getting at. He's saying, why, Peter? What is it? I told you you could do this. Why did you doubt who I said that you are? See, one of the cool things, one of the things I love about not just this story, but the entire story of the Bible, like beginning to end, the Old Testament and the New Testament, is the Bible is a story of people's belief in God, but it's also a story of God's belief in people. I mean, just think about this. God is ultimately saving the world through the death and the resurrection of Jesus. That's what Jesus is all about. That Jesus' death and resurrection is God's means of redeeming and restoring creation, saving it, bringing it back to what he created it to be. Now, the word the New Testament writers give to that is gospel. Gospel means good news. It's the gospel of Jesus, the good news of Jesus, that through his death and his resurrection, God is making everything new. God has entrusted that message, that mission, to human beings, to people. That's why Jesus created the church. And Jesus sent the church out in the world and he said, I want you to be the ones who take this message, verbally and tangibly. I want you to go in the world and proclaim the message of Jesus, his death and his resurrection, and that through that we can all be made new. God has entrusted the very foundation of his mission in the world to human beings, to us, to people. And get this, there's no backup plan. There's no plan B. It's us. It's all on us. That God looked down at people and he said, I believe you can do this. So much so that I'm entrusting what is most important to me to you. And so as much as people in the Bible believe in God, God believes in people. And really, it's more than just belief. James, who's a brother of Jesus, James writes that, look, even demons believe. Like, the point isn't ultimately believe. The point is to trust. And what you see over and over again throughout the scriptures, and really I would argue throughout history, is that God trusts people. And I know that this isn't just going to cure all of our self-doubt and insecurity like in a moment, but to me it's a great place to start. Sometimes I have to stop and almost give myself this motivational pep talk and remind myself that, you know what? God thinks I can do this. That as I face obstacles and challenges in my life, you know what? God believes in me. God actually thinks, he's told me over and over again that I can do this, that I'm his child made in his image. And because he's with me, I can do this. And again, knowing that doesn't just change everything instantly. But as we start to tell ourselves that over and over again, that starts to chip away at all that self-doubt. Because, you know, we're either going to believe who other people say we are, or we're going to believe who God says we are. And if we start trusting that we are who God says we are, then that totally transforms that self-doubt. And it becomes, hey, I can do this, not because I'm sweet, not because I'm awesome, but you know what? Because God believes in me, and because I'm his child made in his image. And he loved me so much that he died and rose again, and he's with me. And because he's with me, I can do this. And so my encouragement would be for us, as you find yourself in these moments where self-doubt kind of really starts to creep in, that stop in that moment, that recognize, like be aware of that voice, and stop long enough to know and to remind yourself, hey, that's not from God. That's from somewhere else. That's from something else. And take a moment to remind yourself of who you really are and who God says you are, and that he believes in you. And he believes you can overcome whatever the obstacle is that you're facing. Now, I want to switch gears, and I want to look at another story about doubt, but this one is more about disbelief. The Peter story is about how we overcome that self-doubt, but I want to look at one story, and it's kind of a famous story. It comes from the book of John, which is another one of the Gospels, John's account of the life of Jesus. And this is a story that happens after Jesus' death and resurrection. That when Jesus dies, no one believed he was coming back to life. No one. When he died and he got buried in a tomb, all of his closest followers thought, that's it, it's over, we're done. Like the movement died. As much as Jesus had told them, I'm going to die and come back to life, nobody really believes that anybody was going to come back to life. But then we're told that a group of women, one of whom is Mary Magdalene, go to Jesus' tomb to put spices there, which was kind of a customary thing. But the tomb is empty. And what's interesting is when the tomb is empty, Mary Magdalene, her response is not, oh good, he rose from the dead. Her response is, someone stole his body. So again, no one thinks he's coming back to life. Mary Magdalene runs back to the apostles and says, look, I went to the tomb, his body's gone. Some of the apostles run and they see the empty tomb. And slowly, as like the events start to progress, people begin to accept and believe that he rose from the dead. There's times where Jesus shows up to some of his closest followers. And as he shows up and he's there with them, he's like, see, here, I'm alive. Then people start to believe and they start to accept, okay, he really did come back from the dead. But there's one of his closest followers, a guy by the name of Thomas. And Thomas is not there the first time that Jesus shows up to his core group of followers. And so Thomas is really having a hard time believing his friends. That it's now a week after kind of Jesus' resurrection and people have seen Jesus and Thomas has heard the rumors and he's heard his friends say, I've seen him. But Thomas just can't bring himself to accept it. Here's actually what Thomas says. Here's his words. But he said to them, as Thomas, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. Thomas says, look, I need to not only see him to believe this, I need to actually physically touch him to believe this. Because it's great that you guys had these experiences, and I don't know why you had these experiences, but I'm just telling you from my own, like, I will not believe until I see and touch. And Thomas, he kind of gets a bad rap. Throughout the years, he's been known as Doubting Thomas. But I think Thomas's response here, I think it's totally reasonable. I mean, if someone came to me and was like, hey, someone that you know who died and you saw them get buried, they're back alive again. I'm not just going to be like, okay, sweet. I'm going to struggle with that. That's going to be hard. And so I totally understand where Thomas is coming from. Now, a while later, Thomas is with some of the other followers of Jesus, some of the other apostles, and Jesus shows up again. And this is now the first time that Thomas is actually in the room when Jesus shows up. And John says, here's what happens. At that point, a week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. So now, this is the first time since his resurrection that Thomas has physically seen Jesus. So now he's in the room. He's seeing it with his own eyes. But remember, for Thomas, seeing isn't enough. Thomas said, I need to touch. It needs to actually be physical. And so Jesus shows up in the room. Thomas is there. He knows what Thomas is struggling with. He knows where Thomas is at. And so here's what Jesus says to Thomas. He looks at him and this is what he says. He says, you idiot, Why did you not believe your friends? You're a loser for thinking I was not alive. I'm done with you. Get out of my face. Now, that's not at all what Jesus says. But that's a lot of times how we might think or we might feel that people respond to our doubt. That there's like, what's wrong with you? That doubt is weakness. But what I want us to see is Jesus doesn't respond that way at all. Jesus is not frustrated with Thomas. He's not angry with Thomas. He doesn't think Thomas is stupid or weak. Jesus totally gets it. So much so that here's what Jesus actually says. Here's his actual response. Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here. See my hands? Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. Jesus walks over to Thomas and says, bro, I get it. So you want to see, you want to touch? Here, see where they put these nails in me when they crucified me. And we're told that they stabbed Jesus in the side. He says, look at the wound in my side. There, now that you've seen, now that you've touched, now you can believe. Jesus isn't angry. He's not disappointed. He's not let down. He gets it. He's okay with it. And what he does is ultimately, in the midst of his doubt, Jesus invites Thomas to go deeper. And then, here's Thomas's response. Here's what Thomas says after that. Thomas said to him, my Lord, which means master, and my God. Now, here's what's so incredibly fascinating about this statement. This statement right here is the climax of John's gospel. 20 chapters in, toward the end. This statement is the climax because here's what you have to understand. Each of the gospel writers, each of the accounts we have of the life of Jesus in the New Testament, they're telling Jesus' story to a particular audience from a particular angle. And so there's different things they're highlighting. What John has been trying to convince us of from the beginning of his gospel is that Jesus is God. See, a lot of the gospel writers begin with the birth of Jesus and they talk about Mary and Joseph and Bethlehem and all that stuff. John doesn't tell us anything about that. John begins with this idea that the Word became flesh. That God became flesh and he lived among us. He says, we've seen the glory of the one and only. That right from the very beginning, what John has been trying to convince us of is that this Jesus who was alive and he was killed and he resurrected, this Jesus is God. That's who he is. Thomas, right here in John 20:28, Thomas is the first human being to refer to Jesus as God. What Thomas says here is what John has been trying to get all of us to acknowledge all the way through. That yes, Jesus is our master, but more than being our master, he is God. And Thomas does this out of doubt. That ultimately, this is what's so cool to me, and I've seen this true in my own life, that ultimately Thomas's doubt leads him to a deeper, richer, full of faith. That it leads him to understand really who Jesus is. That even after his resurrection, not everybody's saying this, but Thomas, in the midst of his doubt, based on his experience and his struggle and his wrestling, he actually comes out with this fuller, deeper, more vibrant faith. And see, this is what I want us to understand about doubt when it comes to struggling with disbelief, especially when it comes to like the core foundational things about Christianity, whether it's the Bible or Jesus or God or any of that. Doubt, a lot of times people use it as an excuse to walk away. Well, I don't know if I believe that, so I'm out. But what I want us to understand, the framework that I want us to be able to use, is to be able to understand that doubt is actually an invitation for us to go deeper. Because here's the big thing I want you to take away from this. Here's the big thing I want you to take away from this today. The God who trusts you invites you to trust him. Okay, this right here, this is why we talk about Christianity as a relationship as opposed to a religion. You may have heard people say that, and a lot of times when people say it sounds really confusing, but let me explain to you why people say that. When you talk about religion, religion is about structures and systems. And yeah, within the church, within Christianity, there are structures and systems because you need those things whenever there's people. But the heart of Christianity is this relationship between us and God, between us and Jesus. And faith is a relational term. It's about trust. And so the heart of the Christian faith is our trust with God. And it's mutual. It goes both ways. It's not just our trust in him, it's also his trust in us. And so the really cool thing about faith And again, you see this all the way through the biblical story. The really cool thing about faith is that the further we go in life, the more we journey in life, God, the God who believes in us, the God who trusts in us, continues to invite us to trust more and more in him. And so doubt, if you approach doubt from the right framework, it's not just this excuse to walk away. It's actually an opportunity for us to go deeper in our faith. And so you, in your own life, as you approach doubts in your life, I don't want you to ever view them as weakness. Well, this makes me a bad Christian, or I'm not a good person. It's not. Doubt, I believe doubt is a part, and in some ways, I would say doubt is almost essential to our faith journey. It's a part of it. It is. I mean, not every relationship you have in your life is just 100% smooth all the time. You go through different seasons where you have to figure things out. And the same thing's going to be true in faith. So I don't want you to ever approach doubt as, oh, it's weak, there's something wrong with me. No. Doubt is actually an opportunity for us to dive further and further and to ultimately develop a faith that's richer and truer and deeper. So when you find yourself in the midst of doubt, don't be afraid to ask those questions. Don't be afraid to dig deeper. Don't be afraid to search. Don't be afraid to wrestle. God's not afraid of it. Jesus is not afraid of it. Look at it as an opportunity to go even deeper. And the other thing I would say is when other people in your life, people maybe close to you, maybe your children, maybe your spouse, maybe your friends, when they start to open up and express doubts to you, don't respond to those with fear. Don't look at them and be afraid like, oh, if I can't answer this, if I can't fix this, if I can't solve this, you're going to walk away. Don't respond to it because as much as it's an invitation for us, it's also an invitation for the people around us. You're not going to be able to fix that person's doubts, and you're not supposed to. What we're supposed to do is love each other and encourage each other and support each other. So if someone opens up to you about the doubt in their life, my hope is that you would come alongside that person and you would love them and you would encourage them and you would help them search for the answer. That you wouldn't give them some pat cheesy answer that would make them feel bad or would downplay their doubt. But you would say, you know what, those are great questions. And I may not know the answers, but you know what, I'm going to come alongside you and I'm going to help you and we're going to kind of work through this together. Because I really believe that if you approach doubt from the right framework, ultimately it leads to a fuller, deeper, richer faith. And this comes from someone who has been there and has done that and has come out the other side with such a deeper, more life-giving trust and faith in God. And so I hope that for you, in your future, as you move forward, that doubt doesn't become an enemy. That doubt doesn't become something that you're afraid of. That it becomes something that you embrace as a part of the faith journey and an opportunity for you to grow deeper and to come out more alive and more full. Let me pray for us. Father, I thank you so much for your love for us. I thank you that you gave everything to us, that you ultimately gave your life. And God, I know that all of us struggle with doubt. We struggle with self-doubt. We struggle with disbelief. And Father, I pray that today you would help us to understand that those are not bad. They're not evil. That God, those are a part of life and they're a part of faith. And that God, we would be able to approach the doubt in our life and the doubt in other people's lives. Father, with love and with grace. And knowing that ultimately these things are an opportunity for us to grow. For us to grow in our understanding of who we are in you and of what it means to live as a human being and what it means to live in connection with you. So God, help us to always respond with courage and with boldness and with love and with grace. And Father, help us to work through our doubt so that we come out of it with such a deeper, fuller faith. Father, we love you. We thank you. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, once again, I want to thank you for joining us live, for hanging out with us. It's been a lot of fun. And I want you to know that if this is like your first time with us, that usually when you're here physically on campus, we ask you to stop by the hub and fill out a Connect card. And since you're not here, you can't do that. But what we have done is if you go to fccHB.com/Connect card, there's a digital Connect card. And if you'll kind of fill that out, then we would love to send you a gift. We usually give you a gift here on campus, but we've actually figured out how to give you that gift digitally. And it's go to fccHB.Connect card, fill that out. You can ask any questions. We'd love to follow up with you. And also want to let you know that during this crazy season, we're trying to figure out all different kinds of ways that we can engage kind of digitally and kind of help you and your family and your friends stay engaged with one another and stay engaged with us as a church. And so first of all, if you're looking for prayer, if there's anything we can pray for you about, please email prayer@fccHB.com. We'd love to be in prayer for you. But also throughout the week, we're going to be uploading content to all our social media sites and even to our website. We have a YouTube channel for our Next Gen ministries. If you search on YouTube, fccHB.com Next Gen, that's all our children's, our students, junior high and high school. They're going to be uploading content to help keep you and your student, your child, your family engaged. And so our student ministries, they're going to try to upload that content. They're going to upload that content on the day they normally have programs, so which for high school is Sunday evenings, for junior high is Wednesdays. Our children's ministry, this week, they're going to start to upload everything on Tuesday. So if you'll go to those, there's all different kinds of, there's stuff that we're going to shoot, there's stuff that we're going to put on there, there's interactive things so that you can be doing and you can be doing with your child and with your family. And parents, I would really encourage you to go through some of that stuff, even with your family, to continue to kind of stay connected and engaged through this season. If you follow us on Facebook or Instagram, we'll be putting out updates as we load this content. We're going to continue to do our podcast, and we're going to try to find other ways digitally to kind of help foster connection, because it's important for us to still be connected, to still engage, to still allow God to work in us through this time. So thank you so much for connecting. Stay connected, and yeah, we'll see you back really, really soon. God bless y'all.